Hi again, continuing work on the Marienburg Landship. I've been making progress on the wood of the ship and on the base. Here I've mixed in some Deathclaw Brown into the Doomble Brown and just building that up with a moderately dry brush. This wood grain is sculpted very deep and sharp edged, so it pretty much paints itself. Just flick the brush over and it'll get all the edges. The colour is starting to look very saturated. It's going to be evened out with some washes very shortly. Here's what the main hull looks like at this stage. I've sculpted some ridges here for the back of the crocodile poking out of the water and a tail sticking out the back. His dimensions are looking a little bit stout, but the ship is going to go across the middle of the base, so you won't be able to see the whole thing from a bird's eye view all at once. I've sprayed the base white so that it's a bit easier to get the bright colours, especially the yellow, to show up on top of it, and I find it's easier when working directly onto sand to put down a little bit of water first before applying the paint, in this case using Avalanche Sunset just to get a solid yellow colour. After looking at tons of photos of the Nile River, I've decided to go with a dark blue base tone for the water, add some ripples and texture effects, and then muddy the whole thing up once that's all done. Starting off with Cantor Blue base paint here, which looks bright directly over the white, but after a couple of coats it gets nice and dark and murky. I realised while I was painting this section that the grooves where the bases join together are still a little bit deep and therefore visible, so I've gone back in a moment and filled those in with some liquid green stuff and tried to get them level and smooth with the surrounding base, and then repainted the blue over the top of them. I mixed in some Wild Rider Red into the Avalanche Sunset to make a wash that will add some warmth and depth to the sand. Then once that's dry, gone back over the top with some more Avalanche Sunset. This was followed by dry brushing successively brighter yellows on top of the sand, Aerial Yellow, then Flashgitz Yellow, finally Dawn Yellow, and then Dawn Yellow with a little bit of white mixed in. Back on the hull, I've finished highlighting the panel you can see below, ready to get some details added on. The final stages for the wood were a layer of straight Deathclaw Brown brushed on, and then following this up with a really light dusting of Dawn Yellow, same as we used for the sand, with a bit of attention paid to the sharp edges and corners on the crossbeam so that they'll show up through the tinting. Dawn Yellow is a really versatile colour. It lets you do a nearly bright white highlight, but with a little bit of warmth to it, keeping in a bit more saturation than an ivory or an off-white. Now I get the enviable task of picking out all of the ship's nails with fulgurite copper. Ship's nails were made of copper quite often because it was rust resistant. Doesn't rust in the same way that iron does, but it's still hard enough that you can hammer it into a hardwood plank. Then I wanted to get the base colour down on these shields before applying a wash over this whole thing, so that it will blend it into the wood and create an occlusion shadow, and in case I make any mistakes going over the lines, then the wash will hide that. The shields will all be variations of red, blue and yellow, the colours of Marienburg and Sudenburg, so a dark blue and a dark burgundy colour for these ones. Around the crocodile in the river, I've mixed in some Cabalite Green, which is a teal turquoise colour, into the base blue, and I'm putting some motion, some ripples, some flow around the crocodile, and just to give the river a sense of movement and a sense of direction. Starting off with wider brush strokes that just follow the course of the river, then adding some turquoise and finally some white into the mix to do thinner, more deliberate and distinct lines that are closer to the crocodile, as if the water is being disturbed more the nearer it is to the object. This is meant to look cartoony rather than realistic and easy to pick out from a distance. The crocodile itself, of course, is going to be green. Now all of the wood is getting a liberal wash with Agrax Earthshade. Not only will this add depth and shadow to the wood, but this will also put a little dark circle around all of the copper nails, which otherwise would be very hard to see against the brown wood, and so then I can come back in with the copper again and make them really stand out and be visible. For the iron parts, picking out all of the little rivets and screws and bolts and sharp edges with some iron breaker silver and adding some weathering to the tank. Before I apply the wash to the bottom section of the ship here, I'm going to pick out all of the sea life that's clinging to the hull of the boat. At some point this was a sea ship and not a land ship, so there is a collection of barnacles and limpets and other critters attached to the bottom of the boat, which I'm going to pick out here in purple. And in amongst all of those, there's a little starfish, which I'm going to start off with Wild Rider Red. I like an orange starfish. Thanks for coming along on this voyage with me. I'll see you on the next leg of the journey where I do some assembly and I'll start looking at the crew. Take care.